A topic I've explored a lot on my channel as of late is that of wrestling. That of the sport in which you fondle your opponent and get them to lay down. This discipline, this art form, it's dying. It just simply is. This art form does not work how it used to. This art form is changing. This art form, it's becoming more and more obsolete every single passing day. But of course, when I say that, you have to understand specifically what I mean by that. The reason why wrestling is dying in MMA is because everybody is becoming such a good wrestler. I mean, that's what it comes down to. For the longest time in MMA, and when I say the longest time, I'm talking years and years and years and years, you'd have really high-level collegiate wrestlers, you'd have really high-level international wrestlers, Olympic wrestlers. They would come to MMA, and they would pretty much only know how to wrestle, and they would dominate with it. They would get a hold of whoever they were fighting, they would get them flat on their backs, they would pin them, and the person on bottom just had no answer. Absolutely none, and they would get stuck and pinned every single time. And it's for that reason that people consider wrestling to be the best base for MMA. But as of late, we've seen that's just not the case anymore. And again, I think the biggest reason for this is everybody at the highest level of MMA are so well-rounded. They're such good wrestlers, grapplers, and against really high-level opposition, it's insanely difficult, for one, to get your opponent flat on their back, and then two, to keep them there. I always go back to those famous clips of Khabib grappling with Luke Rockhold, where Khabib is just fully locked in on side control, doing nothing other than trying to pin him. And of course, Luke is having a miserable time trying to get out of that position. You put anybody in a position like that, where all you're trying to do is bear hug them from side control, it's going to be really difficult to try to get back up, let alone somebody with, elite skills such as Khabib. But the problem is, in order to score in MMA, you either have to advance in position or you have to throw strikes. And as soon as you posture up to throw strikes, you're no longer pinning. As soon as you try to step over to a more dominant position, again, you're no longer pinning, and it gives your opponent the perfect opportunity to get back up to their feet. And what this all comes down to, why this means that wrestling is dying in MMA, is just that wrestling is not the win condition it used to be. The days of, oh, I'm just going to go in there, I'm going to take my opponent down, I'm going to hold them down, and that's how I'm going to win all my fights. That is just not a reliable strategy anymore, and it just doesn't work the same way as it used to. So if you hadn't yet seen this video of mine, well, congratulations. You don't really need to now. I gave you the full cliff notes on it, and that's just because I think it's important context to the subject of today's video, which is the group of people who utilize grappling, who utilize wrestling, I would say more effective than anybody else, is Team Khabib. And the crazy thing about this is, all of them, apart from Belal Muhammad, have never actually wrestled. I mean, they don't come from a wrestling background. They've never competed in a wrestling rule set. But despite that, this team, they have found and mastered the meta of grappling. They grapple better than anybody else, so they use it more effectively, and I think it comes down to a few very key things that these guys are just masters at. Number one, of course, is managing distance, maintaining distance, and setting up your takedowns. Mateusz Gamrot is a better wrestler than Islam Makhachev. He's a way better wrestler than Khabib ever was. You make them do a wrestling match against him, both of them would lose, because Gamrot spent his entire life wrestling. That is his background. But the problem is, the way you set up takedowns in wrestling is so different than in the context of MMA. Why couldn't Gamrot have any success with grappling against Beneil Dariush rounds 2 and 3? Well, he couldn't get any respect with his striking, and therefore Beneil was very ready for him to shoot every single time. Whereas you look at Islam, for example, and Islam is always maintaining distance so well. You try to pressure him, he'll circle away, and then wait for the perfect opportunity as soon as you move in to drop in on an extremely deep takedown that at that point you just can't even defend. And then there was Khabib's strategy of staying on the outside and then finding his moments to explode on you with flurries. It forced you to cover up. It forced you to back up against the fence, where you would again get really deep on takedowns to a point where you just can't even defend it. And then we have our most recent example, Belal Muhammad. Now, Belal, he fought Leon Edwards in his physical prime at 32 years old. And during that fight, Leon dominated the distance between them. He held the center, he was forcing Belal to be on the outside, and he just couldn't get any respect with his striking at all, and therefore had zero success with any takedowns. He couldn't even shoot a proper takedown because, again, if you don't control the distance, you can't set anything up effectively. But you look at their rematch, and at this point, Belal had been working with Team Khabib for years now, and what we saw, the big difference maker was, he dominated the distance management. He got right in Leon's face, stuffed his kicks, got into boxing range, was constantly peppering him with punches. He was forcing Leon to have to cover up, which opened up the takedowns beautifully. And now this leads us to the second big thing that these guys do, and that is they are always hunting for your back. Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, they both had moments of getting Leon down. The problem is, though, Leon would just turtle and then stand back up every single time without much opposition. And then all of a sudden, that small amount of control time accrued by Colby and Usman, it just wasn't really worth anything. But Belal Muhammad, it was in those moments that he won this fight. I mean, that was the big difference maker. That the second that Leon turtled to his knees, Belal was immediately riding him from the back. And yes, pun intended when I say that. He stayed on his back, stayed behind him, kept a body lock on him, and he was always hunting to get his hooks in. And as soon as he did, he would slap that body triangle on. And then that's it. That's game over for the entire round, essentially. The body triangle is king when it comes to pinning your opponent and holding them in place. It is far, far better than just being on top of them in closed guard. And that exact strategy that Belal was implementing against Leon Edwards, on the ground, that's exactly what all of Team Khabib does. I mean, look at Corey Sandhagen versus Umar. Now, look, I've always said the bantamweight division is probably the most high level, the most cutthroat division in the UFC. But Umar, when he was getting the takedowns, the first thing he would do would try to jump on Corey's back. Now, of course, Corey Sandhagen is so goddamn high level. He did an amazing job defending. But you see what the strategy is. Islam Makhachev, the exact same thing. When he fought Dustin Poirier, he was using Kimura traps to force Dustin to turn a specific way just so he can take his back, slap that body triangle in, and now the round is essentially over. Or, when he fought Volkanovski, imagine from this position right here, he was just trying to do what Colby Covington does, which is just hang on to the back and just try to accrue control time. It would have never worked, but Islam just sunk that body triangle and immediately he wins the round. Compare that to when Michael Chandler fought Dustin Poirier. Michael Chandler was a 4-time Division I All-American wrestler, and, it was just different. I mean, it was just different. He would get Dustin down, Dustin would turtle, and he had no ability to take the back. He had no ability to ride him out from that position. He was helpless to stop Dustin from essentially just getting back up every single time he turtled. And I think you can easily make the argument that Khabib was better at this than all of his guys. It's kind of tough to say because I think Khabib fought way worse competition than Islam has, for example, but he would take your back, but for the most part, he would just try to ride the position from behind you and force you to work. I mean, that's exactly what he did to Dustin Poirier. Dustin kept trying to explode on him. He kept trying to hit these reversals, and Khabib had moments where if he wanted to, he could have sunk the body triangle in, but instead, he just chose to ride him out from that position, stay on his back, keep that body locked, and he just made it miserable for you constantly. And look, I think it's simple, it's elegant, but it is so difficult to pull off. But these guys, they've all mastered it. This is the meta of grappling in MMA. Dominate the distance management, get deep on takedowns, ride your opponent from the back, sink the body triangle in. That is the meta of grappling in MMA. And as of right now, the people who have mastered it, that's Team Khabib.